Remember to support us by subscribing and sharing, but also signing up at cricket8.com, where live scorecards cover 8,000 matches a year with advanced visual details that tell you who is actually in front in the game.
In case you've not already done that, do it immediately. We know you have more than one device to actually also watch the podcast and listen to it and sign up. So, I am Megha and joining me here is Jared, and we are at the Cricket8 podcast. Yesterday, we discussed about the long season ahead in Test cricket for India and what to expect in general from it. Today, we'd be zeroing in on the players to look out for, the youngsters and the veterans. Jared, first things first, let's start with the superstars of Indian cricket team, what to expect from them. The two names that stand out in batting, Virat Kohli and Rohit Sharma for sure, and then in bowling, Jasprit Bumrah.
So I'm really interested to see what happens with Virat over the next little period of time. I did a podcast with your friend Deep Dasgupta the other day, and we were chatting a little bit about now that Root's found another level and Kane Williamson's average is quite big. Does that inspire Smith and Kohli to get back to where they used to be? Do you know what I mean? Does it inspire them to go absolutely ballistic from here on in? And that's what I'm interested in from Virat's perspective. And from Rohit Sharma, I think he had a really good couple of years as a top order player, and I'm interested to see what drives him now. Like, is it winning the World Test Championship, which I think is what is on his mind? And if that's the case, he probably has to unlock some things at the top order. Bumrah's going to be Bumrah while he's fit, right? Like, no one's got any issues as long as he's fit and available. I think the bigger issues for India is their sort of second, third, fourth seamers rather than their first one. No problems with them there. So I would expect Bumrah to still be fantastic.
Absolutely. And then just coming back to the same topic, that's Virat Kohli. Didn't play the England Test series. India won it comprehensively in the end, 4-1 being the margin of victory for India. He'd be raring to go because obviously it's been a while. It's a format that he rates very highly, that he prioritizes at all other times. So for him to actually prove that he belongs, and this Indian team needs him. And beyond that as well, in terms of stats too, how his performances in England, we saw what happened in 2014. He struggled, but then came back in 18, did well. 21 was a mixed bag as well. So doing well in England is important. Doing well in Australia is important because again in 2014, it was important for Virat Kohli to set the tone because that series was extremely competitive. Although Mahendra Singh Dhoni retired, stepped down rather as a captain midway through the series, Virat Kohli taking over the mantle and setting the tone for the rest of his tenure as captain. So all of that combined, Virat Kohli would be raring to go. Rohit Sharma has found the style where even in Test cricket, he goes gung-ho at the top. And he'd be accompanied by Yashasvi Jaiswal. Now, we saw him striking big in doing well in West Indies in his debut series. South Africa, he struggled. In India, he was expected to do well, did really well. So from here on, 2 series in India and then overseas. What are your expectations?
I would temper them just because I don't want him. I just don't think he needs any more pressure. Like, I mean, not that I'm going to put pressure on him, but I just think in general, it's probably best to take a step back. I think we all got overly excited with him. And if he makes another big innings, it's going to start up again. So it's almost been great that he failed in the last IPL, that he didn't have a fantastic IPL. So we've got a period where he didn't make runs, in South Africa, and he failed in the last IPL in and around greatness that he has already shown, right? So I think that's a really good place to be because it would be worse if everything he had done had been perfect. Then you get something that is unsustainable, right? What happens in Asia isn't all that important to me. Like, obviously, I hope he makes some runs. The Australia one's quite interesting for him because of South Africa, of how those things go together, whether, he might just need to develop his batting a little bit more. That won't be what people will say, though. If he fails in Australia after failing in South Africa, what people will say is he can't face fast bowling and he can only play in Asia, which won't be true, but that is what the narrative will be. So I hope he kind of does well enough that isn't the narrative, but I also don't expect him to be able to conquer it in one go. It's a very fascinating conditions. Australia is the most alien conditions, I think, in cricket. right? I think it's the most different to anywhere else. There are parallels with South Africa, but South African wickets aren't fast like Australian wickets. There's a couple that are, but in general they aren't. You don't get the consistency of bounce in South Africa that you get in Australia. You get sideways movement in South Africa, right? We don't get a lot of Vernon Philanders come out of Australia, whereas you do in South Africa. So it's a very different kind of place. But if he fails in them, they'll be lumped together. And I think that is a bit of an issue going forward. But he's clearly a incredible talent. And I'm excited to see, I'm kind of excited to see what he does in every single game, right?
We're following the chronology here, and now we get on to the pivotal number 3 position, occupied by Shubman Gill at the moment. Against England, he rediscovered his form, has been given a long rope in the format. Questions had begun popping up around that time when he was struggling the Hyderabad test, but subsequently pulled up his socks and came up with some important knocks. Had a mediocre IPL and then fair performances subsequently. So, Shubman Gill, the test batter, how do you rate him in general and the conditions and the challenges that would be thrown at him? We'd expect him to do well against Bangladesh and New Zealand in home conditions, but the conditions that England and before that Australia offer.
Yeah, I think in Shubman Gill's case, I believe the most important thing at the start is really to get himself into the side correctly. So it's probably a lot more important to him for these upcoming games of like literally just going out there, making enough runs so that he's a genuine member of the side, right? Like I don't think you want him to be in a situation where he feels when he gets to Australia he's still playing for his spot. Now, everyone's playing for their spot at a certain point in Australia because it's probably going to be a very brutal kind of series. But you don't want him to be going into the first test thinking, oh my God, do I have to make runs straight away? So if he's made some runs, I think you want that from that point of view. I think one of the issues with Shubman Gill is I think he's a comically bad starter. And I wonder if he's not as bad a starter when he's opening and he's a bad starter when he comes in further down the order because it makes him feel uncomfortable, right? I think he thinks like an opening batter, and India obviously are thinking to themselves, well, we have opening batters. What we don't have is a number 3. So he has to work that out. And the more he plays there, hopefully the more comfortable he will feel. But there's no doubt that his record at opening the batting is far superior than it is to batting first drop at the moment across his first class career. So he needs to work out how to feel comfortable. So for him, this series is, if he averages 45 across this series, across all these home series, and goes to Australia, he'll be in the side. He won't have to worry about anything else. And then he can hit the ground and just play cricket. Whereas I think if it's certainly below 40, questions will come back up. And that means he's hitting the next series not on top of his game.
And the previous management backed him thoroughly, despite the criticism around, despite Shubman Gill's struggles. And in fact, it was on his insistence that he was sent at the number 3 position. Now, further down, Virat Kohli aside, it gets slightly complicated because there are a number of contenders for the positions on offer. There's KL Rahul, Sarfaraz Khan, Rishabh Pant, Dhruv Jurel. Now, Rishabh Pant and Dhruv Jurel, both wicket keepers. Rishabh Pant walks back into the side very comfortably because of what he has done in Australia and England in the past. But Dhruv Jurel too gave a fair account of himself in that England series. Gritty knocks that bailed India out. Do you see India making some place, some spot for him? Maybe not as a wicketkeeper batter, purely as a batter, as a crisis man?
Look, it's interesting. We just haven't seen enough of him playing outside of his home conditions, right?
India,
So I think it's a really tough one for them to work out of whether he's just an Asian specialist who's a really good player and you take him away from home and he's fine, but maybe not a superstar, or the opposite of that is perhaps he is that, incredibly assured player that we've seen so far. But the problem at the moment is that he's played in like 19 first-class games. So we don't have a huge amount of information on him. And, I'm going to clump a few of these players together at the moment. But if you look at Sarfaraz, and you could go to Shreyas Iyer as well. I know he's not completely in the frame right at the moment, but in general, right? Yeah. There's a few players that we know are good in India. What do they do outside of India is the question. And I think from chats that I've had with people, within the game, there's a big question mark on Shreyas Iyer and Sarfaraz whether they can travel.
Yeah.
Both of those are issues going ahead. Dhruv Jurel, I haven't heard it, even though he hasn't played much cricket. I think he's played like 2 first-class games in South Africa or something, which probably for India, eh? Yeah. Even though he hasn't played all that much cricket, I think people feel his technique is going to translate better to out of India than the other guys. But the other guys have a higher ceiling, right? We're talking about Sarfaraz and Shreyas Iyer could be great players based on their talent, right? Now, it might be already too late for Shreyas Iyer. Unfortunately, COVID might have come at the wrong time when he should have been playing more international games away from home and everything. And maybe by the time he develops, it doesn't work for him. But Sarfaraz isn't in that position. So I suppose that's when it comes down to these. A really good selection committee will have been looking at these guys in the nets when they're playing for India A. We'll be looking at them in the nets and everywhere, and maybe getting them to go up against fast bowlers, even on AstroTurf if they have to have a look at how these things might translate. And then you're in a situation where you can start to make more informed decisions on how this is going to go. But it looks to me that there's like 2 or 3 players who are just obviously going to be fantastic in India. But how is it going to translate to outside of India? And I think that's a really, really important question that they need to that they need to work out before Australia, right? So you might take Dhruv Jurel just because you think his game is going to translate more, or you might take Sarfaraz because you think that he's a potential test great, and Dhruv Jurel is probably not, right? Like there's a big difference in their overall talent, and so then you've got all them, and we haven't even come to KL Rahul in that, which I think you mentioned in that block as well. So KL Rahul probably goes because they're going to want a senior player. They're going to want a player who can back up their openers, who can also bat at number 4, who can bat at number 6, right? It gives them another wicket-keeping option if they need, although they probably won't need that. But if there's a last-minute injury, it gives them another wicket-keeping option. All these things that KL Rahul can give them is... and he's a professional and everyone knows him and trusts him. But that all the fans are going to be like, no. We've seen KL Rahul. We want to see the next young kid. So there's going to be that balancing act between all that. And the Rishabh Pant Dhruv Jurel thing's really interesting as well because Rishabh Pant was on the path to greatness, right? Not on the path to be very good. I've done the numbers. He is on the path to greatness as a wicketkeeper batter. That's not even counting his strike rate, but just average alone. He was on that path. Now they've got this other guy who's really, really interesting, right? And how he comes in. So, there's a few different elements to that. And so, like Apocalypse has said here, just to go back to KL Rahul, KL and Pant are really good overseas. Rishabh Pant's fantastic overseas. KL Rahul averages 30 overseas, right? In Test cricket. I think maybe 31. We know he can make hundreds in England, Australia, South Africa. We know he can make runs against the best bowlers in the world, despite that weird T20 tournament that everyone keeps going on about from years ago. But we don't know if he can make consistent runs away from home.
Yeah.
And so they've got a senior player with known flaws, and they've got younger players with unknown flaws. Right? That's hard. That's a hard decision to make. But I still think that's a better situation to have multiple options there, and they can take a whole bunch of these guys with them and work it out when they're there. I mean, teams don't do this as much as they used to, but in the old days, you would take your players and you would go over and you would see how the practice games go or the nets. Oh, hey, we brought him over to the nets and he can't handle this. Or we brought him over to the nets and he looks fantastic. Let's just give him a go.
That's what probably England do. Look at the social media viral videos as well.
I don't even think England look at people in the nets or what they do. Yeah, it's literally Ben Stokes is just flicking through Instagram looking for 6'5" guys.
Yeah, probably that's the new criteria. But in India's case, KL Rahul in the South Africa series kept wickets as well because Ishan Kishan backed out. Now, had he not gotten injured at the start of the England series, probably we wouldn't be raising this question. He would have been a certain. He would have done fairly well in home conditions, and the averages and stuff would have looked nice. By the way, do you remember that Hanuma Vihari phase where India would back him overseas, but when it came to playing in India, there'd be some other player occupying that slot?
Yeah.
So would you see something like that happening again? That makes for an interesting question.
Do you know what? India is a team where we could start to think about that. I think in general, it's so weird. We've always done this in cricket, that we have this situation where we pick bowlers based on particular wickets. So, the spinner will come in when we're going to Asia, right? And we don't go anywhere else. And it's a really, really odd decision that we do in cricket that we've never done with batters. And I can tell you why if you want to know culturally. It's fascinating. But it's basically because in the old days of English cricket, the posh guys were the batters and the professionals were the bowlers. And so the bowlers could be yanked out. You couldn't take out Lord Henry, of Marpleton. How could we take him out of the team, right? Whereas, the woodcutter, he's out because this wicket's going to spin or this one's going to keep low and we want another bowler. And we've never done that with batters. India's a team that could do that. The problem with that is it kind of works and it doesn't work. You then create what I would call the sort of Chris Wokes, R. Ashwin, Stuart McGill problem, which is players become really, really good at the conditions they're already good at, but you then can't use them overseas, despite the fact they might be more talented than other players. You can't use them in conditions that don't suit them anymore because you never allowed them to play in conditions that don't suit them, right? So there, I get the idea of it. Perhaps and India, again, they play so much A cricket, or could play so much A cricket, certainly, that you could get to a point where you do that. But we're not quite there. I could do this all day. I know KL Rahul's career off the top of my head. KL Rahul opened in some tests, that reduces his average. KL Rahul averages more opening than he does in the middle order when he plays away from home. My memory of his average away from home is something like 21 when he's not opening the batting. Don't if you're not going to do the research, don't put the comment in.
All right, there's another comment that's about Pant and Jaiswal. Hari Krishna, it's the same person. He's saying with the role of run accumulators, would that be a constant in Test cricket instead of IPL? Why can't we have impact sub in Test cricket, given we have fourth inning specialist, spin specialist, and first day bowlers? It was not the comment that I intended to pick, but this is something that's kind of very out of the box.
So I've
This was
talked
a
about this
comment that I was trying to
before.
pick.
I think I might have even done a whole video on it on my channel. It's really interesting. I think cricket's a fascinating sport because we created a sport where a person who can't do a job has to go up against someone who's brilliant at that job. So the number 11 has to bat against the bowler,
Yeah.
right? So I don't know, Glenn
Which other
McGrath.
sport? Yeah.
Glenn McGrath has to face Sean Pollock, right? Or whoever the worst is, right? Chris Martin has to go up against Shane Warne. All these sorts of situations. And it's fascinating. But it's also very different to American sports where there's a guy who plays 4 minutes a game in the NFL. There's literally guys who run on, they kick a ball and then they walk off. Like that's all they do. Right? That's literally all they do. And so we've never done that in sport. We haven't had this. And I would say that there is an element of, I would say that there's an element of what happened was, so in soccer, in football, there weren't substitutions for a long time. And then I think it's around the 1950s when substitutions come in. And cricket missed that period and it just didn't do it. And so the 12th man never became the 12th player. And so we never had a period where we could do that. And so you get people now say, well, we should just have injury subs because we have the concussion subs. You can't have injury subs because I could find an injury on a fast bowler any particular day to take them out. I would cheat that system. I promise you as an analyst, I could cheat that system on a daily basis. For those who don't know, fast bowlers regularly drill holes in their big toenails to release blood, right? I could show you bloody foots of any fast bowler in the world that would get me an injury sub any day I wanted them, right? So we can't have that. So it means that we have a sport where the worst players have to do some role. So if you're Mujib out of Afghanistan, you have to field, right? There's an element of greatness in that, right? And it makes cricket a really interesting sport. The opposite side of that, of course, is that some days we have to watch Scott Styris bowl for 10 overs in an ODI, and we don't want to watch Scott Styris. We want to see a really good bowler bowl in that ODI, right? And, Marcus Stoinis is fun. I want to see Marcus Stoinis used as a tactical choice, not because he has to bowl, because Australia have to fit in a fifth bowler. And it's the same in Test cricket. Like, I love the fact that, you might get a fast bowler who is really suited to the first day. But wouldn't it be great if you had, I don't know, let's pick someone at random, Bhuvi Kumar or Jason Berendorf play in Test matches, but they only bowl in the first innings of Test matches when the pitches are green, right? And then on the last day, India's got like 7 spinners to pick from, right? I think that's that would mean that at any stage your best batters were going up against your best bowlers in the conditions. It's a fantastically interesting way of looking at cricket. So I think that was a very good question from Harry after his previous one where he hadn't looked at KRL's numbers.
I was waiting for you to point that out. And with Test cricket, the conditions become even more varied, unlike, say, T20 and ODIs, where it's broadly similar, broadly due notwithstanding. Now, the comment that I was trying to pick, and because there's so many comments flooding in, my fingers haven't been moving as they should. Arjun says Jaiswal and Pant is key, especially to keep out left-arm spinners away at home with regards to Australia. I think if Bumrah plays 4 tests, India will win, but 2, it's about can they outbat first Test match?
Yeah, the left arm spinner thing is quite interesting because that's not if we're throwing forward to the Australian series, that's not as big an issue. I think I just don't think India is ever going to be out bowled enough consistently in India by the other spinners. Even Bangladesh, who have really, they have a fantastic spinners who spin the ball in both directions. I don't think you need to worry about that as much. But India is and has been over the last 7 or 8 years really obsessed with finding more left-handed batters, right? And it's a big deal. Australia probably finds too many, and India probably find not enough. And you go to Nathan Lehman and Ben Jones's book, and you kind of start to understand. In Australia, no one bowls off spin, so left-handers just absolutely dominate. And in India, everyone bowls off spin, so left-handers struggle, right? And it's as simple as that. Why the two differences happen. And so that is important. Look, the Bumrah thing, I don't think Bumrah playing 4 tests is not so great that wins India the series. Because Bumrah is going up against Hazelwood and Cummins, right? So Bumrah in some ways gets nullified by the fact that the opposition have bowlers of, I would say he's bowling better than either of them, but they're right up there as well. The issue for India with the seamers, and I'm going to jump ahead because you were going to ask me this question anyway. The issue for India with the seamers is partly Bumrah's fitness. It's more Shami's fitness.
Yeah.
But for me, it's the 3rd and the 4th seamer
that
are the real question marks here. And there's one person, his name says Pat Cummins, but it may not be Pat Cummins, Megha, who keeps asking the same question. Remember, we could see your questions. You only need to ask it once. If it's interesting, we'll remember it and we'll go back to it. And if it's not, you're just boring people, especially the guy that kept asking the same comment about Joe Root, which you could look up on Cricinfo or CricBuzz. Pat here, the real Pat Cummins, I assume, is basically asking if Prashant Krishna and Harshit Rana could be used in those sorts of conditions as their hit-the-deck type bowlers. So Prashant Krishna, I've been a big fan of him pretty much since that series he played against England. And I can see why everyone sees him as an international bowler. The problem with him is I don't think he's quite accurate enough for Australia. So the idea that you just need to be tall and fast is really good for Australian conditions. But tall and fast and not accurate doesn't work in Australia. The pitches are too flat. So you do need that sort of stuff. I don't think Harshit Rana is really that kind of bowler. But this is the issue of Arshdeep is probably not perfectly suited to Australian conditions, although there's no reason why he couldn't be successful there. But Arshdeep's problem is he's great on some days and poor on some days. And the third best bowler is exactly the same. Like Siraj is exactly the same. So if one of those ends up being the second choice bowler, that's when the issues start to come in. And I see there was another question earlier as well about Nitesh Reddy. And where Nitesh Reddy sort of fits into this, and should he be playing? And I think it's a really interesting one because if you do play Nitesh Reddy in these series now, you get a bit more of an idea of him, of whether he's ready. Pardon that, I'm not even saying pardon the pun. I did it on purpose. Is Nitesh Kumar ready? right? Is that maybe the best way of saying it? Is he really ready? But the point being is, again, you're talking about taking players without a lot of experience over. The best case scenario for India for the Australian tour is Hardik Pandya saying, I'm ready to play Test cricket. And I can play 3 tests, and they can take over Shardula's cover, and he can play the other 2 if that's what they need. I don't think they do need it, but if that's what they feel. I don't think just throwing in a young player to be able to do that. But perhaps what they could do is, if Hardik is willing to play, you could take Reddy over and play him in maybe a match. But if you're going to do that, he kind of has to be playing Test cricket beforehand, I think. And it's very hard. This is when you were going back to your batting thing before. This is where it gets tough for India. Their conditions are of recent times have been so dominated by spin bowling at home, even more than traditionally in India, right? That it's hard not to play 3 and 4 spinners to win at home. But then how do you prepare your side to win away from home when you're doing that, right? And, I've said before, the last couple of years, I think actually we might have had another question about this, about the batting and about India's batting away from home. And you look at India's batting away from home, and there is some issues with their batting away from home. I think I had the numbers up actually before when I saw that question come in, but I think they're averaging 29 away from home in the last 3 years in Test cricket, right? Which is...
So is it a certain... Which position are you talking about? Top 3 or top 5?
Well, I think he was talking about the entire batting order. So when they travel away from home, so Australia away from home, and this is part of the reason Australia's had success, have been averaging 32.66. Pakistan, weirdly enough, has the second best average when traveling away from home. And then you have Sri Lanka, New Zealand, and India are all on basically one side or other of 30. And none of those sides, we would say, have been very strong with batting in the last 2 or 3 years, right?
Yeah.
And so you have a position where India's batting hasn't traveled away from home. But part of the problem with that is it's very hard to be good away from home if at home your wickets are completely slanted towards bowling and you have no confidence, right? I've always thought that one reason Australian batters are so good away from home is they all average like 50 at home, right? So when they go away from home, they go away with an unnatural amount of confidence, right? And so it's hard with the way that India play at the moment and the structure. So I think for they might struggle with Bangladesh just because Bangladesh has got a really nice little side at the moment. I think they'll beat them because I think they're better than them, but I think that will be tough. I don't think is it Bangladesh first and then New Zealand? Is that how
Bangladesh and then New Zealand?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember
2
my
against
dates.
Bangladesh, 3 against New Zealand. Yeah.
I can't see New Zealand being a threat to India at all. Whereas I can see Bangladesh at least causing them some issues if everything goes right, like it did in Pakistan. But the issue is that they're playing these series, and they'll take the confidence from them, which I just said is very important. But it's nothing like going to Australia, which is a completely different kind of challenge. And so some of the things that it would be worth it, and they don't think about things this way, but because they have such a good pace bowling lineup, they could have some wickets that actually help pace bowling quite a bit in this series, especially against Bangladesh. Not that Bangladesh don't have good seamers, just then they don't have Bumrah, right? Like they don't have that level of seamer. They could do something like that to try and get through maybe an all-rounder, or maybe prop up their second or third best seamer, or their third or fourth best seamer, and put themselves in a situation. But it's tricky because of the way these series go ahead. You're not going to want to give New Zealand any seam bowling conditions. And honestly, the best pitches for India to play against Bangladesh are going to be really flat batting pitches. And just say to Bangladesh, well, we think we can make 500 on these wickets. Do you? And just and allow Ashwin and Jadeja and Akshar to just while away. They may not look as dominant as they had in other series, but they'll still they still should back themselves over Mahdi Hassan and Shakib.
There's another question, this on Pujara, and a couple of questions on Pujara. This one says, who's going to play the role of Pujara? Also, does India need someone to bat that long and hold the fort as long as possible? Now, the question is, does India need someone like Pujara? There was a phase in between when India didn't want Pujara to be Pujara, particularly when they were dominant in the first Border Gavaskar Trophy that they won in 18. So, yeah.
Let's switch this around and say we were talking about the media. Let's say Harsha Bhogle retired tomorrow, and you would get someone say, oh, we need to find another Harsha Bhogle. Well, Harsha Bhogle's been doing what he's done for about 35 years, and no one's managed to find another Harsha Bhogle in those 35 years, right?
There was a Harsha Ki Khoj reality show as well, where he was looking for other Harshas. So,
Yeah, exactly. And, there have been many places who've tried to hire the next Jared Kimber. I don't know how this
yeah.
Jared Kimber exists. I don't know how you
Hmm.
find another Jared Kimber, right? You shouldn't be in a position where you are trying to replicate Yashasvi Pujara because there wasn't another player like him in the world, right?
Hmm.
Look at Craig Brathwaite. Look at Dom Sibley. Both defensive-minded batters. They weren't Pujara. They weren't anywhere near the level of Pujara, right? They didn't have the skills of Pujara or the top-level game of Pujara. Even
Hmm.
Elgar, fantastic in South Africa, never really worked out how to
Yeah.
make any runs away from South Africa in his entire career. There hasn't been another Pujara that any country has found. So
Hmm.
when I'm doing stuff like this, I would never sit there. And some coaches and selectors do this. It's like that when England went to Australia one year and like the previous tour, all their tall bowlers had worked. So they went back with all tall bowlers. And it's like, that's great. If you've got the quality and the form of the tall bowlers that the time before, you can do that. If not, you're just picking people because they're tall. And that generally isn't going to work for you. And so I would do the same thing. If someone came to me and said we had to replace Pujara, I'd be like, first things first, is there a replacement for Pujara? And
Hmm.
if there is a replacement for Pujara out there, why the hell is he not already in the side? Because
Hmm.
Pujara is a great player, and if there's someone close to his level, I would assume he would already be in the side. So no, what I would do is look at, is there another way of winning? What's the best way of us winning this series, right? And my guess is India will be thinking, and we don't know what, especially when they go to Australia. This is less so of the series we expect them to win. But when they get to Australia, which is when Pujara came into his own, right? Hardly made
Yeah.
any runs, but completely tired out the Australian bowlers. They're going to go into it very differently. Look who the opening batters are going to be. They got Rohit Sharma on one side and they got Jaiswal on the other. They are going to try and punch Australia in the face. All right.
Hmm.
That is their strength at the moment. Right, especially when you think that they'll have Rishabh Pant probably coming in later, or we're all hoping will come in later on as well. They have the ability to, in two different parts of the order, attack Australia back. Right, what's the sense of bringing in a guy who might average 35 and block for hours on end, who probably isn't going to be able to withstand Pat? Do you know how hard it is to
Yeah.
do what Pujara and BJ Watling did?
Hmm.
To average over 40 in Test cricket with no shots, right? Like, is so hard because what happens is, Mega, everyone knows you're not going to hit them anywhere. So they
Hmm.
can bowl their best ball to you for hours. And when their best ball is bowled to you for hours, it generally just gets you out. And so that's why defensive batters aren't very successful in Test cricket, because you have to be able to put pressure back onto the bowler, because Vernon Philander will land the ball within an inch of where he wants to for a day and a half. And he knows eventually he's going to get you out, right? So you have to be able to do that. So there actually aren't that many blockers. So no, I'd be looking at what their strengths are, not
Hmm.
what their weaknesses are. And that's the best way to put a team together. If there's anything we learnt from Brendan McCullum, and we can debate the merits of Bazball overall, what did he say? He said, they can't make any runs playing the way they're playing. Let's let them play the way that they play in white ball cricket. So at the very least, they're going to disrupt the opposition, and we can
Hmm.
get some advantages from that, right? They're not suddenly better batters, right? The England
Yeah.
batting averages aren't all over 50 of recent times, right? But they cause issues for people because they're playing to their strengths. And that's a really important lesson. When you're looking at replacing players, you should be looking at replacing players from a position of strength, not from a position of
Hmm.
weakness.
Hmm. So quickly, we've addressed almost everything, but this
Except the
one thing
spinners.
that's remaining. Ah, you knew it. Yes. When more so when India tour Australia and England.
Yeah,
Which of the
spinners.
three?
No, I would assume now that they're going to go Kuldeep, Jadeja, Ashwin at home. Would be
Hmm.
my guess, unless you've heard anything different. And then if they need a full spinner, Akshar might come in. Away from home, I'm going to throw this back to you. What do you think they're going to do in Australia? I know what I think they should do, but what do you think they will do?
Hmm. It's tricky, right? Because we've had this debate forever. Even in India, fitting all four is always going to be a challenge. Akshar has evolved as a batter. Ashwin, as a batter in test, has got hundreds, has been gritty in Australia as well. You remember that drawn test, he had a huge role to play, that partnership with Hanuma Vihari. So, no right or wrong answers, I hope. But I think Akshar and Kuldeep, between the two, it could just get tricky.
But
Do you
who
also throw
plays in
Ashwin
that
in the
first
mix?
test? How many spinners do they play in Australia?
tempted to play two, back their strengths, and it being
And so who are the
Akshar,
two?
Ashwin. Can I narrow it down to three? Akshar,
Nope.
Ashwin, and Kuldeep? No.
So you don't have Jadeja on that side.
I mean, if it has to be two, it gets difficult for Jadeja to get in, doesn't
You
it?
think? Because they're going to have to bat him at 7, I think, in that side.
But Akshar as well. So it has to be either Akshar or Jadeja. It can't
Okay,
be
so
both.
let's say that those two
Considering
are
the difference.
interchangeable. I think they will go with only one spinner, and they will pick
Okay.
probably Jadeja, just unless they think Akshar has jumped him. And Akshar's a little bit taller and might be slightly more suited to Australian pitches, which is fine. But so they're going to pick one of those, one of that type of player. So what happens is, and you see this a lot, and it happens to India, they go overseas, they pick two spinners in non-spinning conditions. One of the spinners doesn't bowl that much, and everyone says, see, we shouldn't have picked two spinners. We should have picked another seamer. If you look at 5-man bowling attacks, generally the fifth bowler never bowls that much, right? It's really hard to use all 5 of your bowlers in a balanced way. It's not how these things work. And so my question would be is Ashwin going to be more use as a bowler / tactician / batter, or is Kuldeep going to be more important as a strike bowler, especially bowling to the Australian tail, than any overs you get out of Hardik Pandya or Shardul Thakur or Mr. Reddy or whoever they take out there, right? Or if they just pick a fourth seamer, but I don't think they will pick a fourth seamer. I think it will be someone who's an all-rounder. And you then have to go, okay, so you weigh up a little bit of batting, especially from Hardik. You get a lot, you get a bit of batting there. But my guess is that is the best way of going about it, is trying to work that out. But that's not how teams do it, because your fourth seamer is redundant in most cases anyway, unless it's an absolute green top. And what you really want from your fourth seamer, which is generally your fifth bowler, is a holding bowler. And I can't see how a combination of Akshar, Jadeja, Ashwin can't be a holding bowler, right? Like any one of them could easily be a holding bowler, and then you attack from the other end with perhaps the wrist spinner and your 3 best quicks. You then have to really back your batting, right? Your top 6 has to really step up in that situation, because there is an issue with batting depth in the side that I've just pointed out. But they won't do that, because almost every time they've done that, it hasn't gone well, and they blame the selection. Whereas I would say that the fourth seamer wouldn't have made that much of a difference anyway, in any of those situations. But that's how they will look at it. But yeah, I think it's really interesting, because you can go into multiple different ways.
Permutation and combination, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about Ashwin's batting. His batting has slipped over the last few years.
Yeah.
He's not the guy who made Test hundreds, and he's not likely to make a lot of runs in Australia. But what he could be useful for is situations like the one that actually happened last time, right? Where you just need to block out some stuff. So he could be really fascinating. That I think it's a fascinating question, but it's also a fascinating question back home, right? You are suggesting that Akshar might have eclipsed Jadeja, right? And that they might be thinking about that. If that's the case, you want Jadeja, you want to be very, very clear that that you think Akshar is your man. You want him to start playing in ahead of Jadeja straight away, right? He needs to play as much Test cricket as possible as the main left-arm finger spinner, right? And also, you want to put him in tough batting positions. Right? We know he can bat. No one's having a go at him. But Jadeja's batting has been real. Jadeja's the master of not getting out. Yeah. Jadeja is the master of not getting out, right? Akshar has to show at the very least he can do that. But Jadeja's batted at 5, right? And I know some of that's about him being left-handed and everything else, but that's a lot to replace, right? And then you've got the Kuldeep Ashwin question. Not a problem in India. You can play both of them, right? The minute you travel, it becomes the biggest issue in the world. Do you really want to get rid of the best spinner of the last 15 years? Do you really want to not have maybe the best strike bowler spinner in the world? Do you know what I mean? Like, what direction do you pick? I think it's a really, really fascinating one, but it's a bit like Australia in the all-rounders at the moment. Of like, if you happen to have 4 blokes who come from Western Australia who are 6'5" and decent all-rounders. It's a pain, but it's a better situation to be in than to have none of them.
Yeah. Like it's the case with India when it comes to, say, third or fourth pacer, because the best one that we have is probably the best in the world. So that's the first pacer. The second could be Shami, Siraj. They can probably exchange that second tag. But then third, is that person available, fit? In this case, probably Shami. And
Yep.
is he the force that he was or he used to be? So that has, I think, been a bigger problem for India. And that's why the spinners then we make it to 2 spinners. We send 2 spinners in our 11. So I think it gets complicated also because of the fact that India doesn't have great pacers beyond that first, second, third slots. And the gap between the pacers
if Bumrah
is huge.
plays well and
Yeah.
Siraj has a bad test and you only have one other seamer, even if it's Shami, that's a big... Now your spinners have to bowl a lot, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if they were in a situation where Siraj was really consistent, I don't think that's as much of an issue. You just feel like, fine. Like, you know, the issue is if one of the seamers, both the seamers are injury prone, the 2 main seamers. And then in Siraj's case, he has days where he's the best bowler in the world and days where he's the worst bowler in the world, right? Like he goes violently. That's tougher when you're in Australia and you've suddenly got that. So all those things, I think they're it's a fascinating problem to have. And like, it's incredible that India are in a situation where they are literally picking between perhaps the 2 best. Well, I suppose Shakib's still playing, but you know, that 2 of the best left arm finger spinner all rounders in almost in history, because there aren't that many great ones, happen to be available to them at the same time, and it actually causes more issues than anything else. But I still think you're better off with 2 seamers, but with 3 seamers. But the safer option is always the 4th seamer, right? And then you don't have to worry about it if things go pear-shaped.
Interesting. Well, that question is very complicated and that was reflected in our answer as well. We did not have one definite answer, but you can let us know your answers in the comment section as to which bowlers would you go with in Australia, in England, at home. We're assuming you'd all have broadly similar answers, but do mention the conditions and the bowlers that you would choose for India. As of now, we'd conclude this conversation. Remember to follow us across the social media platforms. Remember to sign up for cricket8.com. So many interesting games to play there. As of now, thank you so much for joining.
Remember to support us by subscribing and sharing, but also signing up at cricket8.com, where live scorecards cover 8,000 matches a year with advanced visual details that tell you who is actually in front in the game.